This is Steve Laffey's Fixing America. And now, broadcasting live from the Fixing America Command Center in Fort Collins, Colorado, here is your host, Steve Laffey.
Hey, good afternoon. Steve Laffey here. Thanks so much for tuning in. It's Thursday, and we did a show yesterday on the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, and how they changed their estimates of how much Obamacare is going to hurt the workforce. We couldn't finish it. There was so much stuff. I didn't even get into the report. It's so upsetting about what's going on in this country. And I think this week sort of sums it up in spades as to how bad it's really getting for us. Before I do that, though, before I get into it, I want to tell you the reason I'm not wearing, if you're watching today, I'm not wearing the suit coat, the blazer, Hickey Freeman Made in America blazer. I said, I got to tell you about buying in America just before I get into the show. You know, there's a great joy in doing a lot of things that are just right. And so when I buy things, and I don't always do it, I know one day someone's going to find something I don't buy. It's made in America. And I talked to you about if you can't find it in America, find it in North America, which I did with one of my blazers over there because I couldn't find one that really fit me other than the blue one. The shirt I'm wearing is made by Todd Shelton. And I tried to buy some different shirts made in America. It was hard to do. I had to get online. Gitman Brothers, Todd Shelton. The one that wears the best is this one. But the thing that really makes a great joy that never comes from China is that when I bought this shirt, I bought the wrong size, and it was totally my fault. I mean, just the sleeve length or whatever. So I had to send it back. I sent it back for free to Todd Shelton's company. And they took it back for free, and they sent me another shirt, which fits perfectly and is my favorite shirt right now. And today, after about 3 weeks of sending it back, I got in the mail an email that you don't ever get from China. Hi, Steve. Hope your shirt. You've had your shirt for several weeks now. Hope you're wearing it often! Exclamation point. If we need to make any adjustments, please don't hesitate to contact us. It's very important that you're happy. If we don't hear from you, we'll know all is well. Thank you, Susan A. from the Todd Shelton Support. And so, you know, this shirt is more expensive. And I tell you things that are more expensive, things that I buy that are the same amount, and some things that might even be less. So it's more expensive. I'd rather have half as many shirts and have you see me with this every other day than to have a shirt made in China for half price or even a quarter of the price. Because this is how America is going to make a comeback. With great customer service from Made in America products, where we now feel connected. America has become so disconnected through the advent of the internet, even though I got this through the internet, that we don't have a connection. That's why I made the movie Fixing America. So you could see that the person who looked nothing like you, the tall person, the short person, the whatever person, in different parts of the country, and in fact, thought like you. That's why Fixing America at fixingamericamovie.com exists. Because I knew we had to stop bringing people back together. And one way to do that was to travel the country and show people that we are connected. That it may be the job of the major networks to make us seem like we're divisive. And it may be the job of this existing president to try to tear people apart. But generally speaking, Susan A. and myself are now connected. I'm connected by her generous email and show of concern, even if I know she probably had to send out 100 of them that day, right? That's her job. But the fact that she did it, and the fact that I responded, the fact that I'm wearing the shirt, and I was actually going to put the shirt on today anyway. I had it hanging, I was walking around the T-shirt. The other thing I like about the shirt, by the way, especially if they're listening to Todd Shelton, you can't see the T-shirt I always wear underneath. I don't know how people don't wear a T-shirt underneath, but I always do. I don't feel comfortable without it. I don't care how hot it is, by the way. And they have this unbelievable thing where you don't need collar stays, which I constantly lose. They have this little button underneath here. And so the shirt holds up just fine. I don't know why it hangs like that compared to some of my other shirts. But I still have a couple of shirts, I think, left from the olden days that weren't made in America, that are so old I just hadn't given away or thrown away or given to my son who inherits his stuff. So anyway, I know it's a digression. It's not Newsday Tuesday. But I just had to go through that with you because it's really important that we bring it up whenever we can. Anyway, Steve Laffey's Fixing America, and now back to the main story. And the main story is that America is having great problems, and they get shown up in many of the things that we do. this week, the combination of the Senate and the House of Representatives raising the debt ceiling and running out of Washington before the snow hits, and along the way, even though they passed the budget a couple of weeks ago, that included a 1% reduction in the cost of living adjustment, not a reduction in benefits, but a reduction in the cost of living adjustment to military veterans for the 20 years until they turned 62, which was going to save about $6.2 billion over 10 years. They took enough heat from people going on different networks and complaining and calling them that they rescinded it. Just like that. Just like they. So there's nothing you can trust out of Washington, by the way. And by the way, Paul Ryan, who introduced the budget, Congressman Ryan out of Wisconsin, the terrible budget, who I guess, by the way, is one of the keynote speakers at CPAC, Conservative Political Action Committee. Does the budget sound like it's conservative? But they just rescinded one of the two big points they thought that they put in there to save the 60 some odd billion dollars over 10 years that they won't save any of, by the way. Won't save any of. Did the same thing with the debt ceiling. And the 28 Republicans who voted for it in the House and the 12, I guess, who voted for it, who voted to get a vote on it in the Senate, including Mitch McConnell, they're being referred to as being courageous, when there's nothing courageous about destroying our children's future. It's cowardly. All they are cowards. Everyone who voted for these things, cowards. But they'll be at CPAC and people be clapping for them, and I won't even understand how people are clapping for some of these people. You've got it, and that's why we do the show, so you can know the facts. Which brings us around to the other thing that happened this week. It's the Congressional Budget Office, which the president, and we'll hear a mashup of the president of the United States and others talking about what a great thing that they can always rely on this Congressional Budget Office because they're supposed to be nonpartisan, and they kind of are. I agree that they are. They're very static, and I think they're wrong, and I wouldn't take them. But what they came up with is that we didn't get to the report yesterday, but they came up with is that Obamacare will now result not just in 800,000 job equivalents, and we'll get into that in a second, job equivalents being reduced from the workforce over the next 10 years, but 2.5 million. So they threw the estimate up by 3 times. I still think they're off by so much. It's so much worse than that. We're going to go through the report. Before we get to the report, though, what prompted me to start looking at this, and I didn't get to yesterday either, was an article in the Wall Street Journal by a guy named Casey Mulligan. There were some things I didn't get to at all in the article. And it's the important thing that Casey Mulligan, excuse me, a professor over at University of Chicago, has made, it looks like, the CBO begin to realize, and made America now start to realize, that this Obamacare product, because the subsidies that we're putting on it, the amount of subsidies that you have to put on for poor people to even buy it, and I don't mean poor, I mean people who this last year made very little income, because it's not asset tested either, who made very little income, but generally people who are poorer. The subsidies have to be so big, but they have to come off quickly as you go up, or the whole thing would bankrupt the country in many respects. So the marginal rate of what people will pay who are making X, say $20,000 a year with a family of 4, might be a couple $100 a month, and they can afford that or pay that without getting the penalty. But once you get to something that's not $150,000, once you go up that curve, there's a radical change in getting off the subsidies, because they have to get you off the subsidies because somebody has to pay for it. That's what's going on. It's really no different than a direct tax on the people who are making less money. You have to think about it as they're looking out to the future. And we all knew when they passed it that this would be a direct tax as a lack of incentive for people to actually make more money. Who in the world would come up with a policy like that? Not me, not you. A man who never spent any time in the private sector, effectively. Who never really ran a business, even a lemonade stand. He came up with it. He came up with this because they don't care or they don't know or they like it that way. Because the more people they can keep downtrodden, the more people they can provide these subsidies to who think they have to get them from the government, the more they can stay in power and get their votes. Simple as that. The crime is that people in America who aren't paying attention are only figuring this out now. And the other crime is that the people who always talk about the Congressional Budget Office, and I don't, I'm not one of them. I think they do a fair job, but once again, when I say static, I mean that they don't account for the dynamic changes in the economy. So when they say something goes out to 2024, in my opinion, take it with a grain of salt, because they don't know what's going to happen in 2024. And you can see from what happened in the recent budget, as they're analyzing things, the CBO is probably going to put out something about restoring the Kohler analysis and how much it's going to add back into the budget deficit, because it just got changed. So this law is obviously going to get changed one way or the other. It's just going to fail of its own accord. But Casey Mulligan has some interesting points that I never got to. He talks about, well, first of all, he talks about that liberals have turned from claiming that Obamacare missing workers will be a gift to society. They've turned to that. It's going to be a gift to society. And we talked about this a little yesterday, but if you weren't listening yesterday, I've got to include some of this. Because, by the way, the CBO, since employers aren't cutting jobs per se through layoffs or hourly takebacks, by the way, they are going to be, and they have been. That's not included in this analysis. People are merely choosing rationally to supply less labor to work less. Thanks to Obamacare, we're told, Americans can finally quit the salt mines and blacking factories and retire early or spend more time with the children or become artists. And Mr. Mulligan, who I've got to go meet one day over at University of Chicago, reserves particular scorn for the economists making this, quote, eliminated from the drudgery of labor market, end quote, argument, which he views as a form of some French word, trangeur de collect. I don't even know what that means. I don't know what their intentions are, he says, choosing his words carefully. But it looks like they're trying to leverage the lack of economic education in the audience by making these sort of points. I mean, he's being very, very nice to these people. They're basically lying. We don't have or want a society where we discourage people from working. Yesterday, we played clips of people citing Denmark as a country we should emulate when it comes to work. It isn't. Not that I have anything. I love that. I love been to Denmark. Yesterday, we listened to people talking about Germany as being the place to be. Germany has some great attributes, especially about how they buy things made in Germany. But we're Americans, and the great opportunity is for someone like me to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, comes from nothing, and not be discouraged by the tax incentives that would keep him or her from being all they can be. That's the basic point we got to get across to Americans. That's what's in Obamacare and the subsidies that is so destroying and will destroy over time much of the work ethic that made this country the envy of all other countries. It comes down to some simple things. The rule of law, where these people came from, the work ethic when they got here, and the work ethic they passed along to the kids that you can be all you want to be. And when we don't have everybody doing that, and we have less people saying that to their kids, we won't be the America and the world superpower and the great leader and the beacon of light and the exceptional country that we have been. And when we're not, to take it to the next level, if we're not, poses great danger for freedom throughout the world. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We're at LaffeyRadio.com. We're also on Facebook. Thank you for liking us there. And on Twitter, put out the tweets every day. Thank you for reading them and passing them around. We'll take a quick break. Be right back and delve into the document itself, the CBO's addendum.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
Picture this, your next trip, Utah, 5 national parks. First, Zion. You're walking, the ground rises, the ground drops, the ground becomes water. Next, Bryce. You're riding a mule. You're riding a mule under giant orange drip castles. You are not dreaming. You will not forget this. On to Capitol Reef. Take the scenic route, the really scenic route. Take a path you've never taken and see the stars for the first time. Now for Canyonlands. You're riding a bike. You're riding a bike on Mars. Now you're riding the rapids. Class 2, Class 3, Class 4, Classic. Arches, 5:32 a.m. Some things are worth racing the sunrise for. The horizon lightens. You round the corner. Whoa. This is Life Elevated. The Mighty Five. 5 iconic parks, 1 epic experience. Plan your trip at visitutah.com.
I'm always up for a challenge. It's the feeling of accomplishment that drives me. And there's no better challenge than serving part-time in the Coast Guard Reserve. I protect my country, work with the best and brightest. I get great pay and benefits in return. The Coast Guard Reserve is important work. I get to serve my community, and it's always rewarding.
If you were born ready, there's a new challenge waiting for you. Learn about serving part-time at gocoastguard.com/reserve.
This is Nnamdi Asamoah. I play football for the Philadelphia Eagles, but what I do off the field with United Way might be more important. I'm a volunteer tutor and mentor. Why? Because over 1 million kids a year drop out of school, and that's not okay. It takes 12 years to create a graduate, but it takes about the same time to create a dropout. And the difference between a child becoming one or the other could be me, or it could be you. Studies show that if we get to these kids earlier, their chances are better. And kids who read well by 3rd grade are more likely to graduate. So join me in United Way. Suit up and take the pledge. Become a volunteer reader, tutor, or mentor. Because when a child succeeds, we all succeed. Give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Take the pledge at unitedway.org. Brought to you by United Way, the Ad Council, and the National Football League.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
The administration says you were liberated from your having to work to get health insurance. I guess they will say that you were liberated from having health insurance at your job, and you can then get government-based health insurance or health insurance subsidized through Obamacare. Because what happens here, and we've known this is coming all along, and it's been interesting to watch this play out as politicians in Washington realize the ramifications of what they did, is that employers are going to dump workers into the government program. They're going to say that under Obamacare especially, that the new requirements for covering their employees are too great. They're going to pay the fine, which is relatively modest compared to the cost of insuring the folks, and dump them into Obamacare.
Steve Laffey's Fixing America. Thanks for coming back with us here today. That is a good summation of what's about to happen and what is happening. So even though we're talking about, for the last 2 days, the Congressional Budget Office report that talks about how many more people are not going to be working as many hours because of the lack of incentives, or too many incentives not to work, however you want to phrase it, but the lack of incentive to go forward and make more money on the margin, that it's going to be 2.5 million jobs equivalent, because it's not going to be 2.5 million jobs. Just in this one point alone. This is why it's so big. And it's so big because it won't be 2.5 million jobs. It's going to be like 50 million people that have to work for us, working a couple hours less. But the people who heard this report, who have always relied on the CBO. In fact, let's play this mashup. I want to play you this clip of how people have relied upon the CBO, including the President of the United States over the last several years. CBO being the Congressional Budget Office. They're a nonpartisan group that works for the government. I'm not saying I rely on them, but look at what people have done over the years to rely upon their information.
That's not my numbers. That's what the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office says. The Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office has certified, determined by the Congressional Budget Office.
Surprise surprising numbers coming out of the Congressional Budget Office today. The same CBO that spit out numbers helping Obamacare get passed in the president's first term.
2.3 million jobs lost over the next decade.
In addition to people getting canceled policies or finding that if you like your doctor, you can't keep them, these same people may find themselves out of work.
What the Affordable Care Act does is it discourages hard work. And this is the CBO's own language here.
The new American dream of not working.
Because of Obamacare.
At the beginning, there's the president in previous comments citing the CBO as being nonpartisan and taking his numbers, and it's not me talking, it's the CBO, 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 CBO. However, when this report came out, we're going to play this clip again, the president came out and ignored the CBO and came out with his own analysis, which is what is so dishonest about it. It'd be one thing to say, as I have said, CBO, listen, that's one way to look at it. And I think they're wrong because of this or that, or I think they're right because I'm doing my own analysis. It's another thing for just about everybody on the Democratic Party to have been relying on the CBO for the Obamacare and other topics to turn out now and say, well, and say this.
We have a unique system compared to many parts of the world, including France, where partly because of historical accident and some decisions that FDR made during wartime, back in World War II, our health care has been much more tied to employers. That's not the case in most other developed countries. It has worked for a long time, but what is also true is that it has meant for a lot of U.S. companies a greater burden, more costs, relative to their international competitors. That's a challenge. It's also meant that folks who were self-employed, for example, or independent contractors weren't always getting the same deal as somebody who had a job. It meant that folks who worked for small businesses sometimes had more trouble getting decent premiums and decent rates than folks with large companies. So it just created a great amount of unevenness in the system. I don't think that an employer-based system is going to be or should be replaced anytime soon. But what the Affordable Care Act does do is it gives people some flexibility. It says if I'm working at a big company like IBM or Google and I decide I want to start my own company, that I'm not going to be inhibited from starting a new company because I'm worried about keeping health insurance for myself and my family. I can go make that move. If I'm a woman who's and I'd really like to work with them on the farm, but we can't afford health insurance on our own, so I've been working at the county clerk's office for the last 10 years. Now maybe I've got the opportunity to no longer work in a different job and instead work on that farm and increase the likelihood of economic success for my family. So it's giving people more flexibility and more opportunity to do what makes sense for them. And ultimately, I think that's going to be good.
There's so much wrong in everything that has been said in that last 2 minutes that I spoke about so much of it yesterday, but I hate to say I ignore parts of it because someone might play this clip one day and say, well, did you half agree with that? No, I just agree with about everything in there. But the basic point we're making in today's show is that when the CBO comes out with this report now about so many people are going to not be working so many hours, the president deftly, for his own cause, talks about people being flexible. He ignores the fact that maybe he just doesn't know. I mean, the man doesn't know a lot about stuff, right? I mean, as far as running the government or running a business. So he may not know there's a COBRA program where when you leave a firm, you can keep your health insurance for a year and a half. So that lady who was on working for the city clerk, she could do that too. You know, she could just do it. He just ignores that. She's been working there 10 years. That lady could leave and start the next Goodle and have health insurance through the city because she's worked there for enough time to do that. So he just ignores it. But the thing that we're talking about now is These people are using the word flexible, job lock, and so forth. But it's time to get into this document. If I don't do it today, I'm not doing this tomorrow, believe me. This is the labor market effects of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, an updated estimate. By the way, the last clip, just to go back over it, I just got to say this one last thing. You heard he said he doesn't want the healthcare, employer-based healthcare replaced anytime soon, but he wants it replaced because he wants everybody on this Obamacare. And what we're talking about here is only a small part of people not demanding as much work because they get these subsidies that go up and they go away, and the cost goes up for health insurance dramatically as they move into the middle class, which will doom people to be in the lower class of income for years and years and years. Listen to this, very beginning of the overview. The Obamacare includes a range of provisions that will take full effect over the next several years and that will influence the supply of demand for labor through various channels. For example, some provisions will raise effective tax rates on earnings from labor and thus will reduce the amount of labor that workers choose to supply. In particular, the health insurance subsidies that the Act provides to some people will be phased out as their income rises, creating an implicit tax on additional earnings, whereas for some other people, the Act imposes higher taxes on labor income directly. The Obamacare will also exert conflicting pressure on the quantity of labor that employers demand, primarily during the next few years. Not only are people going to be working less, people are going to be demanding less labor because it's so expensive. We've made labor so expensive. And think about it. They want to add a minimum wage raise on top of this. So employers will employ less people near the bottom of our economic, of the economic channel. People who are making less money. They're putting so many burdens on people they won't get the job. This is all happening together. And so if you knew this, why would you do it? The Obamacare's largest impact on labor markets will probably occur after 2016 once its major provisions have taken full effect. Stop. We know what's happening now. It's going to be worse after 2016. We know what's happened to people. We know people, you all know people, whose health insurance has gone away. They can't get on the phone. They can't get on the internet. They can't get health insurance. They're driving down to see if they can get it. If they have it and it hasn't been dropped, their costs have exploded. I've got friends, call them upper middle class, who are like, why am I doing this? Why am I trying to expand the workforce? What am I doing? I've saved up enough money. I don't need to do this. The CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, doesn't take those people into account at all. What about the people who finally throw up their hands and say, like the book Atlas Shrugged, and says, I ain't doing this anymore. This is the last straw. On the margin, there will be those people. You watch them on House Hunters International. They'll be buying a house in Costa Rica. Watch that. That's what they'll be doing. It won't be millions and millions. It'll be hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who just said, this is the last straw. We're not taking that into an effect. But even the CBO admits that the bigger, if you know what the effects are today, and you've seen it, they admit they're going to be worse after 2016. On net, there's going to be a 2%, I'm paraphrasing now, percent during the period from 2017 to 2024, almost entirely where people reduce seeking work because workers will choose to supply less labor, given the new taxes and other incentives they will face and the financial benefits they will receive. Because the largest declines in labor supply will probably occur among lower wage workers, the reduction in aggregate compensation, wages, salaries, and fringe benefits, and the impact on the overall economy will be proportionally smaller than the reduction in hours worked. Do you know what that's saying? And we'll take a break. So poor people are the most affected. They're the most affected, but they count the least. That's what they're saying to you. They're going to be the most affected. They're not going to rise out of poverty. But because they count the least, it's only 2%. Whereas Mulligan over here, the Wall Street Journal says it's 3%. I think it's way more than that. All the effects, not just the reduction of seeking labor. So here's all these people voting Democrat. They're going to be the most affected to climb out of poverty. But they count the least to the CBO. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We'll be right back. We'll finish this up.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
I am an American soldier.
I'm a warrior and a member of a team.
I serve the people of the United States and live the Army values.
I will always place this first.
I will never accept defeat.
I will never accept defeat.
I will never quit.
I will never leave a fallen comrade.
I am disciplined.
I am disciplined.
Physically and mentally tough.
Trained and proficient in my warrior tasks and drills.
I always maintain my arms, my equipment, and myself.
I am an expert and I am a professional.
I stand ready to deploy, engage, and destroy the
enemies of the United States of America in close combat.
I am a guardian of freedom and the American way of life.
I am an American soldier.
I am an American soldier.
I am an American soldier.
There's strong, and there's Army Strong. See what it takes at GoArmy.com.
Well, I finally did it. I opened a 401k.
What? Why? Just wait for the inheritance. We've definitely got a rich uncle somewhere. We're one call away from the winner's circle at the Derby, dinners with multiple forks, a vacation home in the country, using summer as a verb.
You don't actually think that, do you?
When it comes to financial stability, don't get left behind. Get tools and tips for saving at feedthepig.org. This message brought to you by the American Institute of CPAs, the Rhode Island Society of CPAs, and the Ad Council.
When I have an asthma attack, I feel scared. It's like tiny nails in the air poke my lungs. I start to cough. Sometimes my parents have to take me to the hospital.
Today, 1 out of 13 children suffer from some form of asthma, accounting for nearly 1/3 of all emergency room visits.
I feel like I'm choking. It's kind of like an elephant is on my chest. A little whistle sound comes out when I breathe.
But while your child may suffer from asthma doesn't have to make your child suffer. There are simple ways you can prevent your child's next attack. To learn more, log on to www.noattacks.org or call your doctor, because even one attack is one too many.
I feel like a fish with no water.
Brought to you by the EPA, the Ad Council, and this station.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
No, because these people aren't actually going to lose their jobs. There's going to be, at least what the CBO is saying, is that 2 million people may decide not to work as many hours, or they may decide not to work at all, stay home with their kids, do whatever else is, they decide to do. I actually disagree with Mr. Elmendorf here, even though I typically agree with him. I think he's usually right on. I don't think you're going to see 2 million people decide not to work as much. Right now we have a very tight labor market, and basically everybody who has a job now is holding on to it with both hands. And, there's tons of people out there waiting for those jobs.
It doesn't make sense to me, Steve, on the math level. If for $1,000 a year you stop working at a job that pays $15,000 to $20,000 a year, that's not a shrewd decision, and it more or less says that those people who do so are idiots. I don't think they're idiots. I do think that this is an idiotic argument. That's what I'm saying.
That was a Democratic strategist trying to explain again that the people be flexible and though, by the way, you heard a Democratic strategist say that he usually agrees with the CBO, but not this time. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. Guarantee you the guy never read any reports from the CBO ever in his life. He just gets told when to agree. This time he doesn't. He's sloughing it off, and people are going to have more flexibility. It's outrageous. And by the way, one of the things that I think about, it's just the opposite, isn't it? It's not going to provide people more flexibility. If you're at a job and you're in an employer-based health insurance being provided for you, man alive, are you going to want to leave that job? Are you going to feel flexible to deal with the Obamacare? Are you going to want to take that step off the plank and say, my friends say it doesn't work. The doctor choices have been narrowed. I can't keep my own doctor, though they said I could. I don't know what the cost is going to be next year. What if I make the money I think I'm going to make? Can I afford to move up the ladder? Maybe I'll stick at IBM. It's not making people more flexible. They're going to be hanging on to the jobs that actually have healthcare provided by those jobs, at those jobs, as long as they can. Many people will, because they're afraid of the unknown. And the unknown is, as we've been reading through this, is pretty bad. Here's, by the way, we won't get this if we don't do it now. Here's Paul Ryan grilling Ellendorf, who is the guy in charge of the CBO, and he's saying things that we know. He said, well, let's just play the clip now.
What is your best estimate of the effect that Obamacare will have on the total number of hours worked, which is the issue we're talking about? I just want to make sure we accurately understand what it is you're saying.
Right. We think that the Affordable Care Act will reduce the total number of hours worked in the economy by between 1.5% and 2% between 2017 and 2024 relative to what would have happened in the absence of that act.
What is that equivalent FTEs, full-time equivalent workers?
So given the fact that the calculation that we've done to translate that suggests that's equivalent to between 2 and 2.5 million reduction in full-time equivalent employment.
So just to make sure everybody understands this, and I think reading the report, 2 million equivalent in 2017, 2.3 million equivalent in 2021, and 2.5 million equivalent in 2024, right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So just to understand this, it's not that employers are laying people off, it's that people aren't working in the workforce, aren't supplying labor to the equivalent of 2.5 million jobs in 2024, and as a result, that lower workforce participation rate, that less labor supplied, lowers economic growth.
Yes, that's right, Mr. Chairman.
All right, that's sort of rehashing Congressman Ryan. He knows what's in the report. He wants to get it out in public, and it's repeated here at the beginning of the report, and I'll go through it with you now. This is the CBO report that has raised the estimate of how many job equivalents will be lost to Obamacare solely through the labor force not seeking work. Not, as I would estimate, adding in how many people are going to be losing their jobs because employers can't afford to pay them. We'll get into that in a second. The estimated reduction stems almost entirely from a net decline in the amount of labor that workers choose to supply rather than from a net drop in business demand for labor. Get that? This is what they've been saying. So it will appear almost entirely as a reduction in labor force participation in an hours worked relative to what would have occurred otherwise, rather than an increase in unemployment, that is, more work is seeking but not finding jobs, or underemployment, such as part-time workers who would prefer to work more hours. But it's still underemployment. It's still underemployment. CBO estimates, I want to get to this one part. Here's where the real problem comes in. CBO's estimates that the Obamacare will reduce employment reflect some of the inherent trade-offs involved in designing such legislation. Subsidies, this is the subsidy part. Subsidies that help lower-income people purchase an expensive product, right? Like health insurance must be relatively large. The subsidies must be relatively large to encourage a significant proportion of eligible people to enroll. If those subsidies are phased out with rising income, in order to limit the total cost, which they must, at least under the bill they passed, then the CBO would have said, hey, everybody's getting a subsidy. It's going to cost X hundreds of billions of dollars per year. And even that wouldn't have flown. The phase-out effectively raises people's marginal tax rates, the tax rates applying to their last dollar of income, thus discouraging work. In addition, if the subsidies are financed at least in part by higher taxes, those taxes will further discourage work or create other economic distortions, et cetera. It goes on and on. I won't read you the whole thing. But that's the problem. The inherent problem in Obamacare was and is that the subsidies given to people are so large that in order to make it up, the marginal tax rates, when you climb to a higher income, will discourage people from working. It didn't take an economist to know this. It didn't take Casey Mulligan to know this. It was the way it was set up years ago. It's only in the paper now, and by the way, it'll only be in the paper this week. It won't be in next week. Republicans, Democrats, this in the media will go away. They won't talk about this next week. But there's so many more things to talk about. So many more things. It talks about how they've changed their estimates. They've done a lot of it because of this guy Casey Mulligan at University of Chicago. Get this. CBO's estimate of the Obamacare impact on the labor market is subject to substantial uncertainty, which arises in part because many of this is unbelievable, because many of Obamacare provisions have never been implemented on such a broad scale, and in part because average available estimates of many key responses vary considerably. Okay, let's stop and go back to the first part. Substantial uncertainty, which arises in part because many of Obamacare's provisions have never been implemented on such a broad scale. So we elected a guy who doesn't have any business experience, and he put around him nobody with any significant business experience. And they decided to take a large part of the economy and change it drastically with no background in it, with no evidence that it would work, with no ability to produce even a coherent website that people would be comfortable using if they even could. You saw what happened to Target's credit cards, right? I've got my new one. They just millions of credit cards. So big companies have a big problem with people getting on and stealing people's credit card information from hackers. Edward Snowden took all this information and just swiped it and fled to communist China and then to Russia. But we're supposed to get on this next year with people who had no idea what they were doing? That's why we get back to what we call competitive federalism. Let Massachusetts try it. Let Utah have fun with it if they wanted to. They won't in Utah. Let Colorado try smoking dope for a couple of years. See the horror on the parents' faces when little Johnny's smoking dope in 8th grade because his parents do it. Let them see it. That's a state mistake. There's a lot of mistakes that get made. But to take it for the whole country after it was only being tried in one state, don't get me started on it. It was a guy running against each other for president. But what's been 10-care was a failure in Tennessee. The evidence was in. This stuff is a failure. Can't be done this way. We did it for the whole nation. And now it's a nation whose healthcare system is in ruin, whose doctors are thinking of leaving, who will leave earlier. And talk about, hey, by the way, talk about another, like you can't leave. How am I? Just take me, take you. I got these great doctors here in Fort Collins, Colorado. Got access to the best doctor in the world for one of my kids, for one of her issues, down at the Children's Hospital. What if this whole thing has got to move to L.A.? What do I tell people? How do I get into the new system? It's going to be much harder now. Much harder. That's called job lock. This thing doesn't promote flexibility. It promotes job lock. And it hurts the people that we need to help the most. The people who want to get ahead, who don't have access to lots of money yet, but want to learn, they want to grow, they want to live the American dream, they get hurt the worst. Big business, this is another way to cut their costs. They'll jettison all these healthcare costs into Medicare, Medicaid, whatever you want to call it, Medicaid primarily, and into Obamacare. They'll stop providing some subsidies and they'll just, like you said, they'll just pay the fine. Instead of having a 51-person operation, you watch, you write this down. You're going to wake up in a couple of years. Let's get some great entrepreneur being brought up on charges for violating Obamacare if it still exists. He's going to have 300 employees. Because you can't have more than 50, he's going to have 6 firms of like 49 people each. And they're going to be like working in the same building somehow for different companies. That's what he's going to do. He's going to write him a check for $3,000 and then say, go buy your health insurance. This is one of the most terrible shows I've ever had to do because it is so obvious of how bad it's hurting people who need our help the most. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We'll be right back.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
I'm in almost every school bus and classroom. I go to school with your children. We say the Pledge of Allegiance together. You see me around the neighborhood and you tell me that I'm a pretty good kid. Well, I'm 1 out of every 5 children in America, and I'm struggling with hunger. This problem is closer than you think. My teacher tells me we can grow up to be whatever we want. I want to grow up to be someone who doesn't go to bed hungry. There's enough food in this country to feed everybody. Please visit feedingamerica.org today and find your local food bank for ways to help. Every dollar you donate helps provide 8 meals for kids like me, quietly struggling with hunger. Together, we are Feeding America, brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Students, when I call the reason for your absences throughout the years, please exit the auditorium without your high school diploma. Too tired, family trip, sick day, starting the holidays early.
Starting in the 6th grade, students who miss 18 days or more of school in a year for any reason will fall behind and risk not graduating high school. How many days of school has your child missed this year? Absences add up. Keep track at boostattendance.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Army and the Ad Council.
The call to serve. It has no sound, yet I have heard it in the whispered retelling of honorable sacrifices made by those who have served before me. The call to serve has no form, yet I have clearly seen it. In the eyes of men and women infinitely more courageous and more driven than most. The call to serve has no weight, yet I have held it in my hands. I will commit to carry it close to my heart until my country is safe and the anguish of those less fortunate has been soothed. The call to serve is at once invisible and always present. And for those who choose to answer the call, for their country, for their fellow man, for themselves, it is the most powerful force on earth. America's Navy, a global force for good.
Well, Lou, one of the things that the White House has such a difficult time with is that
Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
Well, Lou, one of the things that the White House has such a difficult time with is that they've been touting the CBO and using them to support their position for the last several years. And now all of a sudden the CBO is coming out and saying what we've been saying all along, that Obamacare is going to have an enormous impact on the economy of this country. And when you hear the equivalent of 2.5 million jobs, Lou, that's staggering. And this administration, instead of coming out and saying, well, we need to fix that, they just come out and deny it. The way they did with Benghazi, the way they did with the IRS scandal, the way they did with saying that you could keep your health care bill or your health care insurance if you had it before. They're losing credibility with the American people every day.
It's 6:42 p.m. Time for Steve Plato and his son Dylan to do the dishes. They talk about everything.
Steve Laffey here. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. And that is true. They are just ignoring, really, the truth. And they're going to try to push it off like they've done with so many other things. And listen, we got so much more to get through here. Here's one part of the CBO report. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We get down deep into topics. And it's not that we're personally against the President of the United States. We just simply disagree with this policy. We think it hurts so many people. Here's the thing that I wanted to read. Here's another part of this report that just came out that so many people have been talking about, and so many people who thought Obamacare was a great thing are ignoring or talking about people having flexibility when they're going to get less flexibility. You always get less flexibility, by the way, when the government controls things, right? Like if you're in the Army, you don't really take the weekend off when you want to. They take it off when they tell you to. So when the federal government gets so involved, whether it's Common Core in education, you get less flexibility. So why would you think you get more flexibility with your health insurance? You don't. And there's so many ways we have to fix health insurance. We've done shows on that. And it's the things that maybe some conservatives say, oh, Steve, I can't believe you said that, but we've got to fix it. We've got to fix it using the market. But the ACA, which is Obamacare, also could alter labor productivity, the amount of output generated per hour of work, which would in turn influence employment, for example, by affecting workers' health or a firm's investments in training of workers. The effects on productivity could be positive or negative. Huh? This is why you don't get stuck. I don't get stuck telling you I love the CBO. I mean, Congressional Budget Office. How could they be positive, I wonder? However, and that goes on, and the net impact is uncertain, so they're not reflected in any of these estimates of labor supply or demand. Because Obamacare could affect labor markets through many channels with substantial uncertainty surrounding the magnitude of the effects of their interactions, CBO has chosen not to report specific estimates for each of the channels encompassed by the analysis. Let me ask you this about productivity. You rather have two people coming in for 20 hours a week and training two different sets of people and having them, it doesn't matter what job it is, by the way. Would you rather do that or have one guy working or one lady working 40 hours a week? Which do you think would be more productive? I think it'd be the person working 40 hours. You see, there's something called the learning curve. And whether you're making pens, I did this, by the way, with first grade kids when I lived in Memphis. Well, they're teaching them how to it was fourth grade kids. Teaching them how to put a pen together. Would you be more efficient, you taking the pen and putting all the components together, or a production line where one guy grabs the pen, puts on grabs the inside with the ink, puts the thing on the outside, turns it to the next person, and one person becomes better at just screwing the top on, let's say. That's all they do. And by the way, I have a lot of experience in that when I was younger. I did things that I didn't want to do again because I was poor. I didn't have any money. I kicked the press. Talk about, if you don't know what I'm talking about, if you haven't been in one of these kind of sweatshops, I kicked the press where, the first day to make a pin, it's about this long, about 6 inches long if you're not watching. And you spin it around a couple of times. Look at a pen, right? A pin. And then you click it in. And so after days of doing this to get money to go to the senior prom is why I was doing this. It was like during spring break. It took me days to figure out how to do it. But by the fifth day, and the more hours I worked, the more productive I was, of course. But if we're taking people down to 29.5 hours per week and we have to fill in somebody else to do the job, we're going to be less productive. There's no question about it. This is why sometimes I get on the dismal science of economics. I thought I'd be an economics PhD, and I never got there because I just went to business school. I kind of regret that some days. I should have got my doctorate in economics. But all they focus on are things that are so mathematical. Anyway, there's so much more in here that I'm not going to have time to go through. But let's go through some of it, because none of it's good. The stuff that the CBO doesn't choose to measure in the study about Obamacare and the effects on labor, stuff that they choose not to, maybe they can't, maybe they won't measure, are all bad for productivity and for work, right? Now listen to this. Incentives is a part called Incentives to Change Labor Supply and Groups Affected. For some people, Obamacare expansion of Medicaid will reduce the incentive to work. But among other people, it will increase that incentive. You see? And here's the people. Some people who would have been eligible for Medicaid under the prior law, in particular working parents with very low income, will work more as a result of Obamacare's provisions. That's it. That's all they can cite is that very poor people have before they get up to being somewhat poor, before they hit the next tax level, they could work more. Here's the part. Effects of employer penalty on labor supply. Remember, there's a penalty. under Obamacare for employees with 50 or more full-time workers, which they've changed now, even after this guy wrote the report, out for another couple of years. Why did they change it? First of all, it's illegal to change it. President Obama changed it at will, totally against the law. But he did it because they knew how hard it is, especially these companies that have. You know, if you're like me and you're just working here by yourself and you hire some independent contractors, okay, once you get to about 50 people, you got a real company. But the last thing you need going from 50 to 100 employees is this health insurance problem. So in the next few years, they write, however, when wages probably will not adjust fully, those penalties will tend to reduce demand for labor more than supply. In the longer run, some businesses may also decide to reduce their hiring or shift their demand toward hiring part-time workers, either to stay below the threshold of 50 full-time equivalent workers or to limit the number of full-time workers that generate penalty payments. But such shifts might not reduce the overall use of labor as discussed below. What? So they're not really measuring this in the report, but we know that people who have 55 workers will have to go to 49. And they might go to 49 and tell those guys to work or ladies to work overtime, right? Under certain circumstances, the Obamacare also imposes a penalty tax on people who do not have qualified health insurance. That tax is to be phased in over time. But get this. People can go down to like 49 workers, not be responsible for their health insurance anymore, form two firms of 49 workers when they have 100 employees or 98 employees to avoid all this. But many people will just decide to pay the tax, the employer tax, because they can't afford to pay for the health insurance. For people who are subject to the percentage of income penalty, that tax discourages work, but CBO estimates that a relatively small number of workers will be affected. About 6 million workers, independents, will be subject to the penalty tax in 2016. 6 million is a small number? 6 million? That's the state of Colorado plus 1 million. And among the workers who pay it, a large share will be subject to the dollar penalty rather than the percentage of income penalty. True. As a result, CBO estimates its impact on aggregate labor supply will be negligible. This is where they're wrong. This is where reporters should be reading the whole report. They're wrong about that. It won't be negligible. On the margin, it will be a lot. So the CBO report underestimates, although it's significant, because they're only taking one part into it. That's the part where people will choose themselves to work less, mostly among lower paid workers. But if you add in the minimum wage tax increase that may be coming, that effect together is really going to put the screws, especially to young inner city workers, especially to minorities. Who is going to pay their health insurance? How can they rise out of poverty? This makes it harder. This is the disgrace of the bill, the disgrace of the Democratic Party in this case, in many cases the disgrace of the Republican Party for not acting on this stronger, more efficiently. Now, why are they heading home for break? And this combined with the fact that all this runs up massive deficits. None of this is totally paid for. No one acknowledges, no one even thinks that it is. But the Republicans just caved in. Who in their right mind out there thinking about the Republican Party who's a fiscal hawk? And I mean a fiscal hawk like you're a fiscal hawk listening. Like you pay your bills. You don't have any deficit. You pay down your mortgage as quick as you can. You pay off your credit card. You're the person we're supposed to look up to. What do you tell your kids when they pick up the paper? This is what they see. Government run amok. Taxing the poorest people. And we got to go. Laffy Radio's done for the day. And I'm never going to be done with this subject, so we better end here. It's a disgrace. God bless you. Tune in tomorrow. Tune in the next day. We've got a lot more to focus on. Laffy Radio. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Steve Laffy's Fixing America radio program on the Laffy Radio Network. Fixing America is broadcast Monday through Friday afternoons at 3 p.m. right here at www.laffyradio.com. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or account of this broadcast without the express written consent of Laffey Network, LLC is prohibited.